Joining us today is Kaija Langley with her book, When Langston Dances. Kaija, introduce us to your wonderful story.
Good morning, Bianca. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. When Langston Dances, which is written by myself, illustrated by the phenomenal Keith Mallett, is the story of a little boy's first day of ballet class.
What inspired you to write this story?
A number of things. First and foremost, I was a dancer when I was about ages 5 to 7. And so I've already sort of had a love of dance. And then much later in life, my godson, Langston, I learned he was the only boy in his ballet class. And so when his mother showed me his photo in his class, and he's the only little boy in the middle of probably 3 dozen little black girls, I thought, well, that's one, really unique, and two, must be a bit challenging to be the only boy in dance forms such as ballet. You know, if it was hip hop or even tap, that would be a whole another thing. But ballet is specific, and it's also very gendered and very feminine. And so when his mother said that, you know, he was supported by his classmates, she obviously supported him. His teacher supported him. It really sort of struck a chord with me and made me realize that obviously there are other little boys who either already dance ballet or who might be interested in ballet and might be deterred from doing it because they might be one of the only, or in our society, they might be more shifted towards sports because they're athletically inclined.
I love the themes you brought out in this book of just like being true to yourself and going after your passions, but also, I guess maybe not so obvious is, you know, the importance of the arts.
So often, especially for little black boys, if you're athletically inclined, you automatically are sort of pegged to either be the basketball player or the football player, or less so the soccer player or the baseball player. But regardless, you're almost automatically moved in the direction of sports. And, you know, there are lots of different ways to be athletic in the world. And for little boys, unfortunately, they get really pigeonholed. And Langston, my godson, loved dance. He loved twirling and dancing and leaping. And he did it joyously. He did it, you know, passionately and naturally. I mean, he was a natural dancer, and he loved dance, and he refused to be deterred from doing the thing that he loved. And in his situation, he had the support of family and friends to encourage him to do it. And I realized that, you know, that might not always be the case for a lot of little boys out there.
I saw a post where you said that you started out writing for adults and then transitioned to children. What made you change?
Life. And, you know, funny, an author's journey is never linear, and that's true of all authors. In my case, I started off writing poetry as a young girl at age 7, and then I transitioned into short stories, and then smaller novellas, and then novels. I did eventually go to get my MFA in fiction, so I was writing for adults. And I had this idea in your head when you're writing and when you're sort of growing in your craft, there's always sort of this linear path that you're supposed to follow. You write the story, you critique the story, then you get yourself an agent, and then that agent sells your book, and then all of a sudden Oprah calls you. That's not how it happens for most of us. And it was not how it happened for me. And so I sort of reached a point with trying to progress during that linear journey that did not happen that way. I was having trouble finding an agent, and without an agent, it's very hard to get a publisher, an editor to acquire a book. And so I ended up taking what I thought was a short period of time off, and it turned into a decade. And the last story that I thought I was going to write was about an adult woman who was looking back in retrospect about the summer that she was 12 years old. And I really did think that was going to be an adult novel. And so fast forward some decade later, my spouse introduced me to the writer Jacqueline Woodson. She was in town visiting for Brown Girl Dreaming, and sitting in an auditorium full of middle graders clutching their books like, you know, they were cotton candy. Like it was such a treasure to them. And following her as she read each and every word from the stage, it sort of struck me like, wait a minute, maybe that's not an adult novel. Maybe that's a book written in present time from the 12-year-old's perspective. And that sort of shifted everything for me.
Outside of the storyline and maybe themes, what are the differences between writing for adults versus children?
in a children's book, you really are writing from the lens of the child. You can have children in adult books. You can even have multiple POVs where you may have a POV from a child's perspective. But really, in a child's story, the child is the hero, the main character, the lens through which the story is told. So as an adult, it is really easy to write stories for children that are very pedantic, that are very sort of, I'm going to instill in you and tell you a story and hopefully you'll get the point kind of story. And that's not written from a child's perspective. The child needs to discover whatever themes or lessons through a story from the lens of the child as they're discovering it. And that's how it's different from, say, an adult writing and sort of telling a child, this is the lesson I want you to learn, versus a child coming to that lesson and or that discovery on their own through the story.
Well, Kaija, thank you so much for joining us today.
So thank you so much for this time. It's been a real pleasure, Bianca. And everyone, When Langston Dances is a story for young readers, but it's also a story for adults as well. It's an opportunity, an example to remind adults that exposure is important. In Langston's story, his mom takes him to see the Alvin Ailey dancers, and he realizes that there's another way to be athletic in the world, and dance is what he starts to explore. So don't be afraid to expose the young people in your life to the arts and to other ways of being in the world so that they can fully realize themselves and not feel so pigeonholed, and be supported in the things that they're passionate about.
Ooh, very nicely said.
Thank you so much.